Oh man, Teams has all these cool new things now. They do an automatic transcription. That's fantastic. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? I feel like we're getting towards, let me look and see how we're doing on council members.
Do we want to leave the transcription on? It looks like it's filling up the chat, perhaps.
Oh, is it? Oh, maybe that's not
Let
ideal.
me check on that.
Okay. Thanks, Kimber.
Hi, Mary Draves joining.
Welcome. Thank you. Get started here in just a second, Mary. All right, you think we're good, Kimber?
Yep, I think what I was seeing was actually a transcript, but I turned it off for now until we know a little bit more about what it does.
Sounds good. Well, the nice thing about technology is it's always improving, so that's a really good thing. All right, thanks everybody. Welcome. You are on at the 8th Council on Climate Solutions meeting. Hopefully you intended to be with us. And for those who might be watching us later, we're glad that you're participating and following along. We are going to start by doing our usual attendance. We'll talk through the agenda and do a little bit of setup for the conversation here today. So I think last time we went in regular order. So we're going to do reverse order today. So I'm warning everybody at the bottom of the alphabet that we're starting with you. So let's go ahead and do agenda, and then we'll jump in and keep things moving. So I'm going to start at the end. Ron, with that lovely V. Ron Vogelweed, are you on? Poor guy, he's probably like, I can be 3 minutes late because I'm at the end of the alphabet. Ron. Yeah, see, he probably did exactly that. He's like, I can log in a second late. Okay. Sam Stolper. Oh, Sam's not with us yet either. Jarrell's on my screen. Jarrell Slaughter.
I'm here.
Great, thank you. Dan Scripps.
I'm here and barely prepared.
All right, well, you're at the end of the alphabet and you said your name, so you're good to go. Phil Roos.
I'm here. Hi, everybody.
Cynthia Render Williams.
I'm here.
Yeah, Cynthia. Now I lost her. Oh, there she is. She's back. Okay. Whew. Tanya Pozlowski.
Here. Good afternoon, everybody.
Tanya. Peck.
I'm here. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Quentin Messer. If we don't have Quentin, do we have Steve McCall from MADC? Okay. Dr. Meadows. Phyllis Meadows, are you with us yet?
Yes, I'm here. I'm so sorry.
Nothing to apologize for. I wanted to give it a second because sometimes it takes a minute to find that mute button. So
yeah, I am here. Let me see.
Great.
Yes, I'm here.
Yay! You're fine.
I'm actually joined twice, so I'm trying to figure out how to get out of one of these. You don't need two of me, that's for sure.
Well, we'll take two of you, and I know I have this problem some days, so.
Okay, let's see here. There we go.
Great. Gary McDowell, are you with us?
Director Joseph Riven on behalf of MDARD.
Great. Thank you, Joseph. That lovely background as usual. Marnice Jackson. Oh, I saw Marnice.
Hey, everybody, I'm here.
Great. Brandon Hoffmeister.
I'm here.
Great. Elizabeth Hertel or perhaps Megan Groen from DHHS.
Megan's here.
Hey, Megan. And then Jim Harrison.
I'm here. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Jim.
Hello.
Treasurer Eubanks, a constitutional position, just so that everybody knows.
Thanks for the reminder, Liesl, for our constitutional lesson of the day. I am here.
It's a joke because when we go to State of the State, back when, people used to do things in person, Rachel would always be in a separate room from the rest of the cabinet. We'd be like, where's Rachel? It's a constitutional position. She has a different rank than the rest of us. So
I would have rather been hanging out with you, Director Clark.
Well, I do my best. Director Eichinger from DNR, or Scott Whitcomb, perhaps?
Scott's here.
Great, thanks, Scott. Carrie Dugan?
Present.
Welcome. And I think we heard Mary Draves, but we'll do it because we're going through the list.
I'm here. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Director Corbin from Leo, or perhaps Judd Herzer?
I am here, Director Clark.
Thanks, Judd. Frank Beaver?
Present. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, Frank. Thank you. And Director Ajba, or Niles?
Niles is here.
Great. Thanks, Niles.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so you should have the agenda in front of you. I wanted to point out a couple of things on the agenda. The first is that we're gonna flip around a little bit, a couple of the agenda items. We're gonna have the work group co-chairs talk about the work that the work group has done prior to getting into the GPI facilitated conversation about recommendations. Oh, I see Ron Vogelweed has joined us. Ron, we started at the bottom of the alphabet, buddy. So we're glad you're here. I'm just teasing you. You know that I can do that. So, oh, great. Sam's here too. Thank you. Thanks for chiming in on the chat. Appreciate that. So we're going to talk through, so that will be the agenda for today. Before we actually adopt the agenda, I just wanted to mention that I'm really excited here on the 8th meeting that we're getting into the recommendation conversation. I think we had a really good setup in prior sessions talking through the challenges and trying to build the grounding for the work that we as the council are going to do together. I really wish we were doing it in person, but in the meantime, we're going to do our best with the virtual environment, and also know that there are additional meetings we'd like to put in front of you here today so that we can chart a path from here to the creation of the plan. So we'll do so as we get through this conversation. So can we go ahead and do the work of the council and adopt both the agenda and the minutes? So first I'm going to ask to put the agenda in front of us. Do we have a motion and a second?
So move.
I'll second. Mary
Great.
Graves.
Thanks, Terrell and Mary. Any discussion on the agenda that's in front of us today? Okay, hearing none. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Similar sign? Okay, so the agenda is in front of us. Next, I'd like to make sure that we've looked at the minutes from the last meeting. So you received these a couple of days ago. Hopefully you had a chance to look at them. You got them on Friday. And then we'll get them posted to the website as soon as they're approved by the council members. So can I have a motion and a second for the meeting minutes?
So move.
Thanks, Terrell. Thanks, Carrie. Any discussion on the meeting minutes? Any improvements? Anything anybody saw that they wanted to make note of? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Great, thank you. We'll get those updated. So for those of you that are following along, we update our meeting minutes once they're adopted by the council so that the council has a chance to look at it. I'd like to put in front of you a couple of slides that we put together just to give you a visual around some of the discussions on timing. Kimber, if you don't mind, I can do the slides too if it's easier, but if you've got them. And while Kimber's putting slides up, we're just going to spend a minute on how great Kimber is. Talk about the unsung hero of the work that we do. Kimber keeps it all together and organized, and I'm just so incredibly grateful for the work that she's been doing. You don't see a lot of the background pieces that she puts together, but you know, I would not feel nearly as comfortable with the work that we're doing if it weren't for Kimber. So that was my Kimber love for the day. See if we can do slides. Is that possible?
Jinxed her, talking about how great she is.
No, I
she
didn't jinx her.
delivered.
I just surprised her. Thank you, Kimber. Last time she had slides for us, and I didn't even use them because I was so foolish and forgot. Okay, great. So we would like to, based on the responses to the doodle poll, put these in front of all of us for potential additional dates. So what you've got here is the October 19th date, November 1st, and the December 14th. So recall too that the December 14th we talked about before, just with our regular pattern, the December date ended up on the 28th, which I don't think anybody really wanted to do. So we're recommending that we move it up to the 14th. So these are in addition to the other dates that we have. And on the next slide is all the dates. So before we do all the dates though, I'd like to formally adopt these if you all so choose. So what I'd like to do is actually do ask for a motion in a second and then take a vote on these to make sure that they're formally in front of us. So with that, I know I'm asking a lot of council members for extra time, but I do think that this will really yield the best, most thoughtful process and give us time for deliberation. So with that, could I have a motion in a second to put these in front of us?
So moved. Support.
Great, I heard motion and support. Any conversation about these dates? Again, we took them from your responses to the doodle poll.
Can you just confirm what you said? The 28th is going away, is that right? 28th
Correct.
of December. Thanks.
So the 28th, so this is two additional dates, the 19th and the 1st. And then the 28th, we're moving forward to the 14th. So thank you, that's a good clarification. So all in favor of this schedule, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Great, thank you. Before we talk a little bit more about how the dates fit together, actually, Kimber, you can go ahead and go ahead and go to the next slide. I also wanted to make sure to point out to you some news that you saw hopefully through your email. So I am sad to share that Dr. Brandy Brown has left Eagle. So she's taken on a new role. Really excited about where she's going. It's not yet public. When you hear it, I'm sure you'll all be really excited about the step that she's taking. So just wanted to let you know that we are working internally to figure out how we're going to reconfigure our work to make sure that we're responsive and moving everything forward. But we wish her all the best and look forward to working with her in her new position. So just wanted to make sure to emphasize what hopefully y'all saw in email a couple of days ago. So then just to talk through our proposed timeline here for the end of the year then. So today we're going to talk through building and housing work group recommendations. October 19th, we would talk about transportation and mobility. October 26th would be the energy production work group recommendations. And of course, that's a pretty hefty lift. November 1st would be energy intensive industry work group. November 23rd then would be natural and working lands work group. So then we would think between the 29th and the 3rd if there's additional need for meetings. And then we've got the December 14th date already. And so the intent would be to review the outline of the draft plan and the year-end status report for the governor at that point. But we'll see, maintain the opportunity to additionally create additional meetings if we need them there in the meantime. So that's what's in front of us. Wanted to make sure that we all had a chance just to kind of look at that together. And let's go to sorry, Judd, I see your hand. Question?
Just a quick one, Director Clark, thanks. Just wanted to confirm times for the meetings on November 23rd, 29th, and December 3rd, if we're going to have those two. Yeah. Just want to make sure I put the appropriate holds on my calendar.
Okay. Yeah, and I think we are going to send a meeting notice to hold those times. I don't think I have those in front of me right now, so we'll make sure to get that to you, Judd. Thanks for flagging.
Meeting notice works great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yep, thank you. Thanks for flagging. So we'll make sure to get that. And then just to talk about 2022, I know it's never too early. We'd like to do a meeting in early January, release the draft plan. That's the intent for public comment. And then on the 14th, on January 14th, that would be the formal beginning of the public comment period. And then we would meet in early March to discuss the public comment received and then deliver the final plan on March 14th. So that should give us some time to have those public conversations and make sure that we've got time to process the information that we receive through public comment, and then figure out from the council's perspective which improvements to the recommendations folks want to make. So just to remind you too, we've already had public comment sessions in the earlier months of the effort, and so we're also thinking about like what can we do in parallel so not everything has to be linear and stack up. But that's the proposal for 2022. And don't think that it's all over from March 14th on. Obviously, the implementation conversation is going to require the council participation. And I think that in particular, the piece that I'm thinking about is how the recommendations tie into the broader level efforts that are necessary around climate. So making sure that we've got pieces for implementation going forward that help us, think through the public health impacts, economic development impacts, jobs impacts, et cetera. So lots of discussions necessary for 2022 as well. So with that, I'd like to take us into the co-chair's presentation. I do want to note that we've worked to build consistency between the conversations that have happened. But the work groups are having different discussions. And so the recommendations vary a bit in length and level of detail. So we're working what we can, we're working to synthesize that and to make sure that there's enough detail there, but that they're not incredibly weighty. And of course, part of that's going to fit into the report and the plan preparation process. So just, I wanted to make sure that everybody was sort of grounded in the work of the work groups. I know I've shared this a couple of times, but the buildings and housing work group met 13 times with about 66 people participating, and they'll tell us a little bit more about their process here in just a minute. Energy intensive industries, they had 10 meetings with about 43 people. Energy production, transmission, distribution, 13 meetings with 87 attendees. Natural working lands and forest products, 10 meetings with 44 attendees, one more coming up yet. And then transportation and mobility, 7 meetings with 57 attendees. So there's been a lot of participation, and it would be appropriate to say that there have been hundreds of people involved in the work group process. And frankly, we're seeing hundreds of recommendations. And so it's distilling that back down and making it a manageable chunk for the efforts of the council. So just wanted to frame us around what was set in front of the work groups. So this is a slide that we talked about a couple of times that I think you all have seen and certainly have worked through the work group process. As we are asking for the work group recommendations to put in front of all of you, this is how we framed it for them to, again, try to get some level of consistency from the work groups to the recommendations. And then I think you all have seen this before, so I won't set a lot of time there, but just one more level setting piece. So the first phase, from a council perspective, we were working to, again, make sure everybody was coming at it from a similar perspective, or different perspectives, but similar understanding. Now we're working into this deliberation decision-making phase, and then moving forward with reviewing and refining recommendations that'll then be part of the council conversation. So, all right, with that, I've already gone over my time limit, so I want to make sure that we have lots of time for presentation and for discussion. So I'm going to hand it off to our work group co-chairs and just say, as I have said a few times, I'm so grateful to the work of the co-chairs. So today I get to thank Charlotte and Karen. When we have future conversations, I'll get to thank the other co-chairs. They've really done an incredible job with a lot of complicated inputs to get us to recommendations. So with that, Charlotte and Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Director Clark. Again, my name is Karen Gould. I'm with the Michigan Public Service Commission. I'm the manager of the Energy Waste Reduction section, and I've had the pleasure of co-chairing this work group with Charlotte Jameson with the Michigan Environmental Council. Next slide. So as Director Clark mentioned, we had 13 stakeholder meetings. Throughout those stakeholder meetings, we had presentations from different regional and national experts in this area, but we also took the time during each stakeholder meeting to just kind of have open dialogue with the stakeholders to make sure that we were getting back the correct input that we wanted, and some comments based on both the presentations and things that people had already been actually thinking about. Next slide.
Yeah, so we also just wanted to sort of, I know you guys had already have a presentation on building sector impacts around climate, but we did want to just sort of level set. This is EIA data that was compiled by RMI, so that's who the graph is from, but it does tell you really what we've been seeing in terms of Michigan's direct emissions from the building sector, which is that they've been flat to actually increasing over the last decade. And so pretty big challenge in front of the work group to figure out how we reverse this trend. Next slide. And this is just, I just wanted to sort of highlight some other input that we've gotten in the work group in terms of overarching themes to focus on and how we really structured the various topics that we took up. And I thought this sort of graph on the right from the U.S. Climate Alliance's Building Decarbonization Roadmap is really helpful in thinking through kind of the buckets of how do you decarbonize buildings. And those are really focused around efficiency, electrification, making sure buildings are grid interactive, which involves demand response and on-site renewables and smart thermostats and all kinds of technological advances. And then there are some places around where low carbon fuels and where we really want to focus on embodied carbon. Those things become really important. We did not touch on low carbon fuels as very much at all in our work group because we sort of saw that as fitting really well into the energy systems work group, and I know that they took that up. So just wanted to kind of put that caveat out there in terms of the work that you will see and have seen from this work group. And then on the left is some specific analysis, decarbonization analysis that RMI did around Michigan. And this is kind of their analysis of what we would need to do in order to stay within a 1.5 degrees Celsius scenario. And that's really focused on 50% cutting direct emissions by 50% by 2030. So this is just some samples of the sort of information that we had on the front end with our work group to think through how we were going to structure and what issues and topics we're going to talk about. Next slide. And then the other obviously really important piece of the puzzle is equity, and really making sure that we were thinking about how our recommendations would impact and could benefit low income and BIPOC communities. And again, this is from U.S. Climate Alliance's Building Decarbonization Roadmap, and I just thought it was a good summation of some really important principles and potential benefits that if we do building decarbonization right, could accrue to EJ communities, and we want to make sure do. So I just wanted to kind of underscore that this was another important piece of the puzzle for our work group as we were considering recommendations. Next slide.
Okay, so oh, sorry, I'm getting a little echo there. We started, so just to highlight a few of our recommendations that we felt like needed some highlighting here was, we started with a survey that we sent out to our work group to kind of prioritize some of the things that we already knew would be important to this work group, whether in the building sector or as a whole. And energy efficiency sort of emerged as, early on as a front runner. I think we all know that energy efficiency, has multiple benefits when it comes to not only greenhouse gas emissions, but, reducing bills, keeping our energy bills low and bringing some safety and health aspects to people's homes. I think you'll see as the different work groups present that energy efficiency, or like we like to call it in Michigan, energy waste reduction, will be a common theme throughout the different presentations, because it does kind of touch a lot of the areas. It's also something that, we see as like kind of not only an immediate solution to some GHG reductions, but also helping us to prepare for the other recommendations that are on our list and others' lists, because we know that the least amount of energy that we use in our homes and buildings, the least amount of energy we're going to have to produce and provide to our customers. On top of this, it's also something that provides a lot of benefit to those BIPOC communities. As Charlotte mentioned, we've seen it with the federal weatherization programs. We've seen the utilities really ramping up their low-income programs that they've also offered to their customers, and there's been some great outcomes from that. We know that the utility programs have been really successful. They've really grown over the years, and they've proven to us that not only does it work, it's inexpensive, you get immediate results. It's always on, it's always working. And there's always new technology around the corner. So it's going to be something we're going to have around for quite a while, and something that we can utilize to get us to our goals. Next slide.
Yeah, and so as Karen mentioned, energy efficiency is a no-brainer. The more that we can double down and really ramp up on the successful energy efficiency programs that we have in Michigan, the better. But it's not going to be enough to decarbonize the building sector. And for that, we need to look at alternative ways to heat and cool our homes and our businesses. And electrification in any sort of roadmap you look at, or any building decarbonization strategy, electrification features really heavily. And electrification is essentially switching from combustion equipment to efficient electric alternatives. Full electrification, if that was the route we went down, would essentially, if we green the grid, would eliminate direct emissions from the building sector in terms of those on-site combustion of fossil fuels. Next slide. The really important thing about electrification is that it is essentially a problem of scale, requiring the replacement of millions of pieces of equipment. And so how you manage that problem of scale in terms of timing is really going to make a difference, both for how we're meeting the increased needs on our grid, but also for how we're keeping costs low for customers. And the key thing there is to really focus on when appliances turn over. And that's one sort of strategy for how we can minimize costs on the front end. So, furnaces, water heaters, dryers, stoves account for most residential building direct emissions, but are replaced just once every 10 to 25 years. So if we want to take advantage of those replacement cycles, we really need to think about at what point do we have to sort of more fully transition to hit our 2050 goals. And if you just back into it, with a HVAC water heating equipment life of average about 15 years, if the goal was to fully electrify, you would want to ensure that 100% of HVAC and appliance sales are electric around 2035, so that you can get to that net zero by 2050. Next slide. And then the other piece of the puzzle, obviously, is we need to focus on low-income and BIPOC residents. This is not going to be an inexpensive task, and there are a lot of hurdles. Specifically, as more customers move off the gas system, the gas system will be more expensive to maintain. And you don't want, we don't want anybody left holding the bag, but especially you don't want low income and EJ communities to be footing an ever increasing bill for the gas infrastructure. Also, low income and BIPOC communities are more heavily burdened by the negative health impacts of poor indoor and outdoor air quality. And for both of those reasons, equity really requires prioritizing low income and BIPOC communities as we electrify. And some things that, will help us do that, some strategies to do that would be programs and funding that help low income and BIPOC residents purchase and install heat pumps and other electric appliances, fundings and programs to weatherize and remediate sort of health and safety issues in low income and BIPOC housing while we electrify. It's really important to do these things in tandem. And then potential rate reforms to ensure that electric rates remain or are affordable for those customers as we move whole homes onto electric systems. Next slide. And then these are just some sort of near-term strategies that were identified as really good paths forward for us to start down the path of electrification. Switching propane, electric resistance heat, and oil heat customers to efficient cold climate heat pumps is economically beneficial now for those customers and something that we should really focus on. There's probably other examples of beneficial electrification that we should be exploring in the near term, and we would definitely propose that we look at ways to really maximize those opportunities in the near future. Again, underscoring the need for programs and funding in particular for low income and BIPOC communities to weatherize, remediate health and safety issues, and electrify. And then again, relying on sort of that time of appliance turnover is really going to be key too. And then in the new construction, buildings erected after 2025 are less likely to be remodeled, which underscores the importance of enacting high performance codes for new construction. So we've got to get it right the first time as we're building buildings now, because we're going to miss out on opportunities to need to retrofit them. And then just some information that again came from the RMI analysis. They looked at a bunch of different regions and found that all new electric construction is more economical to build than a home with gas appliances. I know there's some differences in Michigan, and we are hopeful that we can get the specific analysis done here, but I do think that there is some really great opportunities where all new electric construction can be economical now as we look to sort of transition in this direction. Next slide.
Okay, so we just have some other recommendations. Sorry, I'm going to stop turning my mic off because clearly it causes the echo. A couple other recommendations we just want to touch on. Charlotte touched a lot on the funding and finance. We know that this is not going to be inexpensive. We know it's doable, but it's going to be expensive to Michigan's businesses. It's going to be expensive to residential customers, and it's, frankly, going to be unaffordable for low-income customers. So we wanted to bring in some great resources when building our recommendations to talk about, how is this going to actually happen? Where is the funding going to come from, or where could it come from? Another thing that we found could be very challenging with some of the work that needs to be done is Michigan's workforce. So right now, we know that while we do have some really great contractors out there in the green energy field, we worked with some speakers and presenters who touched on a lot of the deficiencies we're having right now, the lack of training, the lack of current contractors who maybe aren't up to speed on, what's best for their customers when it comes to these types of endeavors. So So we did put together a recommendation on workforce development that will kind of delineate some of the ways we think that we could, help to ramp this up and get it ready for us to hit this with the ground, hit the ground running with some of these recommendations. Next slide.
Yeah, and then the kind of last tier 1 recommendation we wanted to focus on was building codes, and that's primarily because Michigan is right now in a building code update for our building energy codes. So it's a really great opportunity for this council and this work to directly impact policy update that's happening. And we think it's a really great opportunity in terms of a policy lever to accomplish some of these goals in terms of making sure new construction is highly efficient, electric ready, and grid interactive. Next slide.
And then just some of the additional recommendations that we talked about were energy benchmarking and building performance standards. We talked about demand response programs, and we have some recommendations built around public health. Next slide. So that kind of wraps up our overview of some of the recommendations, including our top 5 that we really wanted to highlight for you. At this point, I guess we'll just turn it back over to Director Clark.
Great. Thank you, Karen and Charlotte. Appreciate that. So I'm going to give you a quick setup to our friends at Great Plains Institute have been doing a wonderful job facilitating the work of the council. So Doug Scott and Trevor Drake are going to kind of take us through our first conversation around recommendations. I think that was a really good setup, and hopefully people had time to take a look at the materials you got ahead of time as well. So with that, Doug, I'm handing it off to you.
Thanks, Director. Hi, everybody. Want to first highlight that I had some internet issues on an earlier webinar I was on today. Different platform though, so hopefully this one will be fine. But if something happens to me, Trevor's more than able to take over, as you all know. So what we want to do today is, and we realize that this is a lot to get through in a relatively short period of time, but also to assure you that this is not the only chance that you have to look at these recommendations or to make comments on them. And we will follow a similar pattern for each of the work groups as they present, and then we go through and take comments. So every group's a little different, as Director Clark said, both in terms of the number of recommendations and even in the formatting. So when you get materials from the other groups, you'll see the templates that the groups used, but there may be some difference in how the material is presented. So I would point out to you that the rationale for the recommendations and the materials that you received starts in the template portion on page 13. So if you're looking at the different recommendations as we go through, we're going to put the buckets of recommendations up on the screen. We'll start with the energy efficiency bucket that has several of the recommendations in there, and then we'll take down your comments. So raise your hand, and I'll get to you in a queue as I see you. Trevor will take down comments on the screen, and so if and part of the reason we do that is to make sure that we're capturing accurately your thoughts. So if we don't, let us know that. But again, if you want to put a comment in the chat, we can capture that as well. The meeting's being recorded, so we'll also, have that to go back and make sure that we're adequately capturing. Some of you have already submitted comments, either through SharePoint or in other forums. So we'll, obviously we have those as well. And we realize that the idea here is to get as much of your thoughts on as we possibly can and capture that going forward. So with that in mind, let's think about it in terms of, as you see these recommendations and all the work that the work groups have put into these, let's kind of look at the recommendations from the standpoint of clarifying questions that you might have that we would then turn to the co-chairs to answer for you. Or comments that you have, concerns that you have with a recommendation, or where there are some gaps, something in a particular area that's missing. So again, and we're only suggesting that because really with the volume of the recommendations that are out there, that it's probably necessary for us to do that. And again, this isn't the last shot at this. We talked about adding other meetings to, if we need to further on these recommendations. So given the number of council members that there are, and again, the comment portion that we're going to enter into just for the council members that are on the call. So Trevor, if you want to put up the first bucket, the energy efficiency bucket, and then we'll take the comments on the screen. So there are also the overarching recommendation that this group had as well. So if folks want to start making comments on this section, and if you're making it about a particular one of the sub recommendations under energy efficiency, let us know which one that is, and we'll make sure we get the comment in the right place. So,
Doug, maybe just a slight change to what you said. I'm gonna take notes on the document. I'm not probably gonna capture all of the detail.
Right.
Just so that not, so you know what to pay attention to on screen and keep it kind of clean. But our colleagues, Kate and Alyssa, are taking detailed notes off screen. So we are capturing everything, even if you don't see it. But I'll try to capture sort of the essence of what we hear from you all.
I was going to test your typing skills, Trevor, and see how fast you can pick it all up. All right. Thank you. So with that, anybody want to raise their hand and I will call on you? Any comments? And again, if you made comments before, you feel free to make them here again. If you made them, on SharePoint or other places, but just want to let you know we will have those. So I saw Mary Draves first. So Mary, go right ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to comment, but also thanks to the committee for the work that they did. We've reviewed this, I think, as an organization, but also, I've taken a look at it a couple of times now, and I think I have multiple questions. First, I think there's a large volume of recommendations here. I'd like to really understand what are the top one or two recommendations. In the energy, especially in the energy efficiency category, the one thing that I think is kind of interesting in here is I see throughout, we talk about electrification of the grid and phasing out of natural gas, and some other commentary. I'm not so sure that I see in the work, really how we're going to do that and how we're going to do that efficiently and effectively. I just really like to hear, some more thinking from the work group on that, and then also too, the affordability model that was really taken into consideration as all of this was being discussed. The other question I have is how much have we looked at? Maybe we'll have to wait until we see these from the other groups, but I think that from what I understand about some of the other groups, I think that there are some things in here that overlap, and we really need to, get coordinated on what recommendations we're making. So those are just a few of my comments and questions. I think I'm sure there are many more, but I just wanted to maybe start there.
Thanks, Mary. And I didn't know a couple of those were in the clarifying mode, so I didn't know if Charlotte or Karen wanted to respond to any of that in terms of how these were developed and maybe what the top ones are, if you can say.
I don't think I'm sorry, I don't think there are a top one or two. I wish we could pull that out, but it's such a complex topic. But I think that, to us, the buckets are the right buckets. And then the question is maximize energy efficiency, right? And then these are the ways that the work group has identified to go about doing that. So if that's a helpful way to kind of think about how we were prioritizing the different recommendations, that might be another way to sort of narrow it down. On the electrification piece, there is, we had a lot of discussions as a work group around the challenges and barriers to electrification, and we weren't able to capture that fully in the template. I think some of those come through in terms of some of the studies and pilot programs that were recommended, because we really do think that we should be taking advantage of what we are calling beneficial electrification. So opportunities in the near term where it is economical now to switch people over. But we should also be really studying how we do this, and having utilities do pilot programs to start looking at what would be the impact on the grid and how do we manage those additional loads and that sort of thing. So we really tried to get at that sort of a phased in approach. But yeah, you're right. A lot of the nuances from the discussions just didn't come through in the templates.
So I also wanted to mention too, on the energy efficiency side, you see a lot of bullets have to do with legislation. So, we've learned a lot about energy efficiency through what the utilities have done, and we've seen them grow their programs, above and beyond double what the legislation actually requires them to do. And we've seen them also spend, now twice as much more as we did 10 years ago. And that's cost-effective spending. That's spending that, everybody's seeing a benefit out of. And that's not even including, the greenhouse gas emissions, because we don't measure that, and we don't, include that in the utility cost test. When you talk about affordability, we've also seen the utilities, really increase their budgets towards the low-income programs. Just in the last 3 years alone, we've seen them go from, around 28 or 29 million annually to over 50 million annually. So I think that, funding is a challenge. And we've seen the utilities get pushed as far as they're willing to go at this point. Of course, we would love to see more. We've seen it both on the gas side and the electric side, but I don't think that's our only option. I don't think the utility programs are our only option. And so we do have a couple comments in here in this recommendation. We saw years ago, back in 2009, 2010, there was some ARA funding that came through. So, hopefully there's opportunity from the federal side to get funding for this. But the more we do, the more money we can get in this area, like I said, you're going to see energy efficiency as a common. Electrification, as Charlotte mentioned, is expensive, but it's something we have to study. We have to see, what does an electrified Michigan look like? So, those would just be my comments right there. And I'm going to answer one question that's in the chat, because I did mention the UCT score. So someone asked, Sam asked, what is the utility system resource cost test? And that is the test that the legislation requires the utilities to use to sort of prove out programs that are cost effective. So that test, there's multiple tests that can be used with energy efficiency and other types of programs, even electrification. This test was specifically chosen by the legislation, and it does prove out based on utility cost savings. So what is the utility saving by running these programs? But ultimately, I think it was chosen because that shows, that those savings will then be passed on to customers. Is there other tests that could be used? Yes, and maybe they're better, maybe they're not. There's a mix being used across the nation right now. So I think that's why we kind of mention that here, because it does sort of limit how we measure, GHG emission reductions. It's not really included in the UCT score. So we mention that in here because we're thinking, there might be some societal tests that might need to be used to decide what are the GHG reduction benefits that, Michigan's going to realize from energy efficiency.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but I think what we're doing here is we're underestimating what the electrification of the grid means, and I think that I'll be interested to hear more how we see that happening. So I think it's a much larger problem or a much larger issue to deal with than maybe we are giving it credit for in a lot of the commentary. So thank you, and I'll
thanks, Mary. Thank you. And Karen and Charlotte, if you could answer the questions that came up in the chat, that would be really helpful. And thanks for that answer. Cynthia Williams next, and then Darrell Slaughter.
Thank you for the presentation. I just have a couple of clarifying questions. You mentioned for the energy efficiency, the goal was to cut in half by 50%. What baseline are you using? What model year baseline are you using for that?
Charlotte, Karen?
At 50% of 2005?
That was a analysis that was done by RMI, and that was for building emissions, direct emissions. And that was their projection for below 2005 levels. Yeah. And that was their projection for what we would need to do in order to stay on a 1.5 degree warming scenario.
Okay. And then also for the energy systems, I know you talked about moving directly to electrification, but as a roadmap, did you guys consider low carbon fuels, phase out as part of your transition?
Yeah, it was raised, but it wasn't something that we had a ton of time to go into a lot of depth on. And we knew that the energy systems group, not to, throw Commissioner Paratek and Douglas Jester under the bus, but we knew that their group is going to be going into a lot of depth on low carbon fuels. And so we're hoping that work group captures that piece of the puzzle.
Okay, and so with that in mind, I don't know if you guys are planning to talk to each other, prior to the final recommendations coming out to make sure that both things are covered in this space.
Yeah, Cynthia, and a lot of that will come through this group here. So we'll be identifying the cross-cutting issues and talking about that with the council. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Darrell?
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Charlotte and Karen for leading this work group. I actually attended a number of the meetings, and I know it could potentially be a bit of a handful to try to manage all the different comments and different perspectives on how to address this issue. So I really appreciate it. I feel like this set of recommendations actually rise to the actual challenge that we're all here on this council to meet, and then figuring out how can we, in Michigan, how can we do our part to help to avoid cut our emissions and also do our part in terms of avoiding those degree rise. But just, I guess my thoughts on electrification. I know one of the thing I know we will, and this is not the first or the last time we'll talk about it. I know electrification, a lot of what was discussed in your work groups and what we'll probably discuss is the speed in which we do electrification. But want to just generally say, I know folks are concerned. I know Michigan having to be in terms of our climate and some of the switchover that will need to happen. But I just wanted to say, in terms of some of the things you all provided as recommendations, for example, some of the studies and seeing how electrification can actually work in our state, I think is great. And there's already actually some stuff that actually has been done in our state to actually review or to start to look at what electrification looks like in our state. So I think that's a real positive. But I had just a question. I saw one of the recommendations, and if you all had any additional information about it, but if not, that's fine. I'm sure we'll flesh it out. But there's one recommendation on the electrification, having a planning process on the utilities gas distribution system. Was there any additional information about how that process would work, or any recommendations on how that would work? Because that would actually be and how we start to look and I believe what it's getting at is how we start to phase out of gas and get into more electrification. But it's recommendation number 3 under electrification, or under electrification, which is number 2, not the third recommendation. But Charlotte and Karen, was there any additional information about how that process will work?
Yeah, we're trying not to be too prescriptive in terms of like what this would look like, but there are a number of other states, Massachusetts being one, and I'm forgetting off the top of my head the others that have opened dockets at their commission to really explore this. And so I think there are some examples from other states that we could look to as how to go about doing this. And then again, I know the energy systems work group also had a similar recommendation And so there's my have a little bit more detail in terms of thinking around what this docket looks like, but we kind of wanted to leave it a little open-ended to make sure there was some flexibility.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say too, the Energy Systems Work Group also had a set of recommendations around if you did move away from electric for buildings, or you move to electric for buildings, you know, what would that mean? What would be all the steps that would need to be taken? So it's just a further amplification of what's this recommendation is here as well.
Absolutely. I was aware of that, but just want to know if there was some additional conversation or some additional nuances that popped up. So thanks.
No, appreciate it. Thanks. No hands in the queue right now. Oh, wait, there we go. It was just behind a little bit, I think. Phyllis Meadows.
Thank you. And thank you, Doug. And thank you both Charlotte and Karen for that great level setting. It's always good to get refreshed. A couple of things. I haven't had a chance, I'll be perfectly honest, so I just keyed in, obviously, as a public health person, to the recommendations that centered around mitigating the health needs, particularly for low-income families. And I just want to acknowledge, appreciate, I really do appreciate how you've lifted up some of the inequities that might occur as this process unfolds, particularly around electrification, which I think is a big piece of this work. But I was trying to get my head around the mediation efforts and that how electrification, as it's under this heading, might affect the health of the public. So that's number one. It's trying to get my head around, you know, we're trying to move from combustibles to electric, which obviously respiratory wise would be better for children and families. But you know, can you expand a little bit on what you think the mitigation health needs would be? That would be really helpful. And then I was just wondering if in all of this, did at any point did the discussion come about for all aspects of this work, from energy efficiency, changing policies, did the health impact assessments or the need to evaluate the health impacts at all levels of intervention, did that surface in any space?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Karen.
I was just going to say, we do have, you know, the one recommendation on public health, but I think we touched a lot on you know, low income in each of our discussions on each of our recommendations. We do know that, you know, there are going to be some great health impacts that would result from a lot of this, and a lot of this work I'm currently doing at the Public Service Commission through some of the utility programs. We have some low-income all-electric home pilots going on right now. We also have health and safety pilots going on to help with some of the mitigation issues that you talked about. So I think this is something that, you know, while we're learning in different areas of the state and different areas of our different work groups, I think it's being considered in every recommendation and in every work group. But go ahead, Charlotte, if you have more to add on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say on page 19 of the packet, we tried to go into some of the details in terms of the potential health and equity benefits from electrification. But I think that the main thing that was really, you know, sort of astounding to me as I kind of embarked on this work is just the sheer impact of gas appliances, and in particular gas stoves, on poor indoor air quality. You know, there's evidence that children in homes with gas stoves have a 42% increased risk of asthma symptoms and a 24% increased risk of being diagnosed by a doctor with asthma. And then there was a really interesting Harvard School of Public Health study that came out that showed the impact of burning fossil fuels in buildings in Michigan was an estimated 841 early deaths. And those are all immediate benefits that we could, or immediate harms that we could see reversed.
No, I absolutely, I absolutely agree with that. And I think you've done a good job in what I scanned in terms of making the case for electrification. I think you've done that. So, and I looked at the slides that you presented. One of your sort of, I don't know if it was a recommendation or a sub-recommendation, but it said to mediate the health issues while electrifying. Are you saying that as a recommendation that there's something we need to do to mediate any health issues that emerge while we're moving to electrification, or if that was just not clearly stated? Are you saying that you are remediating the health impacts while you're moving to electrification? Then it's not a recommendation, right? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that was just badly worded, probably. Okay. So the thing that we run into when we do even just now energy efficiency and weatherization work in a lot of low income housing is something that's termed health and safety issues. So there's a hole in the roof and they can't blow in insulation, or there's lead paint and asbestos siding. And so we were just saying, let's also, while we're doing this, address all of those issues too.
I think we're on the same page.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of the recommendation might be, as you talk about educating the public, is to really lift up those health benefits of moving to electrification. Because the way it's written right now is just a cost benefit, but it is more than that, as you just clearly said. So how do we get that out? Because to convince folks to move in this way, people also need to understand the health benefits. I just had a colleague who, not low income, did this remarkable remodeling of her kitchen. And she put all this gas, you know, the beautiful burners and everything. And I asked her if she had thought about electric, and she said, "Oh no, this is much better way to cook." And I said, "Well, you know, you're an environmentalist in part. Why didn't you do electrical appliances?" And she didn't have an answer for that. So I think there's a big need to educate the public about the health benefits. I certainly, in the midst of all the wonderful things you did, didn't want to belabor that. But I was just hoping I hadn't missed something that we need to be thinking about, especially from a foundation perspective, as we move into this space. How do we help families? But the one thing I did want to add is the whole notion of making the distinction from, especially in the building space, that a lot of the low-income families are not the homeowners. And is there a responsibility for landlords? And how do we maybe address that, either through policy, through education, or whatever means? I was just curious because often we're asking low-income families with a small percentage of homeowners, okay, to do something, and they're landlords, especially in urban settings, who have that responsibility to ensure that their environments are healthy for children and families. I don't know if I gave you a recommendation, a comment, or just
we'll get it down.
I'm just going to say that landlords issues is definitely has been an issue just in the EWR space for the last 10, 12 years. So I think some of this we touch on in the building code section of our, you know, that we think it's going to take, you know, requirements of building and landlords, building owners. And also I agree with you about education and marketing of, clean, green energy. It's going to be important for, building owners and homeowners, obviously. I have a hard time convincing my family how important it is. And, I've been doing this for 12 years. So, I agree with you, Phyllis, on that for sure.
Thanks, Phyllis.
You're welcome.
Phil and then Carrie.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to really first just commend Charlotte and Karen and the work group. These are really thoughtful and comprehensive recommendations. The buckets feel right. I could see the challenge there. They all seem essential and interconnected. And I can see just from reading it, the tensions that you're balancing there. There are probably many of them, but one of them is just the challenge of where can we assign a specific target? Where do we feel like we've got too much uncertainty? And so we're going to study it further as the recommendation. And then you've got sort of the inevitable pressure of that some of the recommendations might put on existing ways of doing things, existing infrastructure business models, or there could be cost issues. And I just wanted to kind of across all the recommendations and in the spirit of go big or go home, or going as big as we can here, just ask a couple questions that might bring into focus some of those tension areas and maybe identify where we need the most work here. The first one is in the areas where there's a recommendation to study something, like there's an umbrella recommendation for that under electrification, for instance. Are there any of those areas where you actually see opportunities to set a really aggressive benchmark, even if we don't have full certainty on how the impacts are going to be modeled, what that's going to look like? Are there situations where we should set a really aggressive goal, even if it's not perfect? And if you thought about that. And then the other one is just on things that sort of put pressure on existing ways of doing things, or where there are cost challenges. Are there opportunities that you considered or you think may exist to go even bolder? And if so, what are the roadblocks that come up? I know that's a mouthful, but I'd love to just hear some overall reactions to that, and maybe those are just questions going forward.
I think some of the, just to simply put it, some of the studies that we recommend, of course, are always going to slow down the process, right? I agree with you, and I'm sure many people would agree that a lot of this should have took place yesterday. But I think that the idea behind the studies comes with that price tag, right, that you're talking about. It's going to be expensive. What are these natural gas companies going to do? Are we just going to shut them off and put them out of business, put their employees out of business? We're still paying for a lot of their infrastructure. Are we going to put that on the backs of, all the ratepayers and just, say, hey, we got to go green, and sorry, you're going to foot the bill for it, starting tomorrow. So I think, the idea behind the studies is because of those cost implications that are going to be inherent. And so that's my simple answer to that.
I would just add too, there is always with climate work, the study paralysis effect, where I feel like you just get into this place where you're like, oh, we got to study this, we got to study that, and you don't actually do anything. And I think there was some push and pull in the work group around how fast we moved with electrification. I think there was agreement that it had a role to play, but there was big questions about the pace and the overall role that it would play in building decarbonization. And so we thought this was a good path forward to phase that in. So we do, work groups do call for near-term utility pilots where we can start getting this heat pump technology and other technologies out into homes, start the process of converting homes to electric appliances. while we also learn from those pilots and learn from the studies as we go, because I think there definitely was that push and pull between move fast, do it all, and oh God, what does this mean?
Mm-hmm.
Phil, were you, if I can ask you a clarifying question, was your comment that we should more set the goal and study to see if that's doable as opposed to just study first and see, or?
Yeah. I don't think you can do that everywhere, but I just wonder, that's what I was wondering, are there a couple of areas where it's so important that we should just take our best shot at it? And in fairness, I wasn't actually being critical about what's in here, because even under, what's on the screen right now, under electrification, you got a pretty clear goal about conversion of new heating equipment to electric. I mean, that's a very tangible thing that's controllable. But I'm just pushing us a little bit here and saying, is there an area where we should take our best shot at it?
I just want to make sure we were capturing that right. So thank you. Thanks for that. Carrie, and then Dan Scripps.
So I'm probably going to combine a little bit of what's already been said between Mary, Phyllis, and Phil, and just apologize for not editing into the document, but two things jump off the screen to me on the energy efficiency side in terms of barriers, and that's the walk away that I do see, Charlotte, you guys do cover, and then the workforce, which you certainly give treatment to. To Phil's point about being ambitious, I'd love to see us state something wild, like a goal of having the most diverse energy workforce in the country, and show Michigan's leadership there. And I do note that you talk about GHG emissions reducing careers needing advanced training, but there's a large spectrum of energy careers. And so I offer that as something that I'd really like to see. I want to live in a state with the most diverse energy workforce, because that's a powerful statement. There are some low barrier jobs in this space that could be, we could be working on tomorrow. And then on the walkaway problem, probably to Phyllis's point, in the integration of public health and energy efficiency, and what Charlotte raised earlier, that sort of education around natural gas stoves and the damage it's doing. There's a lot to unpack in there. You guys already touched on education for Joe Public, folks that are not as energy literate, just maybe, and even those that are, there's a lot to learn in this space. And so activating, Director Clark activating this council and activating the public that's on this call to share the learnings in real time, I think there's new tools than there were 10 years ago that we should be using to build a healthier state as we rebuild or build back better, to quote a former boss of mine. So those are two of the big points I wanted to bring up. I feel like there's another one, but I can't see it in all my scribbles. So why don't I just close with that, and I'll try to do my best to put in written comment as well.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. Appreciate it. Chairman Scripps.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. I'm not sure that my thoughts are all that organized, but one of the things that struck me in reading this, and I think the references to the ECO Act and some other things, are sort of that, to some degree, everything old is new again. And so in 2008, when we created our first efficiency standard, we didn't call it an energy efficiency standard or an energy efficiency resource standard like most other states did. We called it the energy optimization standard, and it wasn't really that, but it sort of directionally was. And then in 2016, we renamed it as energy waste reduction, which has the benefit of being super, focuses on cost savings explicitly and getting rid of waste in the energy system, which is right, and it's the right goal. But I'm thinking that, one of the things that I think we as the council have in terms of our responsibilities is to work at the nexus of the different work groups. And I think Karen and Charlotte have done a really great job of outlining a lot of issues in buildings and housing. And then how do we think about that as it connects to energy supply, as it connects to transportation? And I think, to the extent that we're going to use efficiency as a driver, and I think we absolutely should. We should both use it as a driver sort of within buildings and housing, but also as sort of the reduction of I mean, sort of keeping our eyes on the prize here, the reduction of CO2. And that, I think, is electrification, not only in the buildings and housing place, but also potentially how do you use an energy optimization standard towards a decarbonization objective, including helping to decarbonize transportation. And I think one of the things that is implicit here, but maybe we could make more explicit, is that it's certainly, if that goes through electrification, going to actually increase the amount of electricity sales, which is really in tension with how the current standard of energy reduction in terms of a reduction in kilowatt hours sold each year is set up. And some of that's fuel switching, but I think it's bigger than that, in particular if you are electrifying and other end uses like transportation. I think it's something we're going to have to get our arms around, is not only how do we use each kilowatt hour most efficiently, but also how do we think about increasing the number of kilowatt hours sold potentially as one of the things that we have to wrestle with, and not sort of have something that in some ways stands in tension with that. So, and then I guess the last piece is, I think we have to, in pursuing that, also be cognizant of I think we may have to say what we're actually trying to do here, because simply allowing for fuel switching, I saw one of the comments, I think it was from Brandon, gas prices, even with the recent uptick, are still low. And I have been concerned for a number of years that simply opening the doors to fuel switching actually would encourage a shift towards gas, not towards electrification. And is that consistent with some of the climate objectives that we have here? So I think there's a ton of good work here. I guess this is me saying part of what I'm thinking about is how do you zoom out from individual work group recommendations, and how do you get the right drivers that are at the nexus there to say we may have to add kilowatt hours, which is in tension to the current goal of reducing them through our EWR programs, but towards sort of a not only fuel neutral, but almost sort of sector neutral approach to energy optimization.
Great. Thank you. Director Clark.
Thanks, Doug. So I guess I'm in a similar space to Dan. So in thinking about, what is the white space between the work groups? It's not really white space either. It's I think nexus is the right word where the work groups come together. And so it's fun to have the chance to have this first conversation around efficiency in buildings, because I think we're all kind of working as to how to shape this together. So so a couple of things that stand out to me. The first is this conversation about education, because I do think that there is so much to be said and so much work to do around making the steps that we need to take, things that people can see themselves taking action on and then taking action on. So, I'm constantly thinking about how do we communicate with all Michiganders. So that's something that stands out to me. First. The second thing that stands out to me, and I was sort of monitoring the progress of the work group as I have been of all the work groups. And then one of the things that I've been thinking through personally is, what do I think? What do I expect from the work groups in terms of recommendations? And I think this is a fantastic document. There's lots of important potential recommendations here that we're all talking through here today. One thing that I did sort of expect that I see in various pieces in this document, but I sort of expected it at kind of as a standalone, is something around appliances specifically, because of the outcome of updating appliances. When you look at, for example, demand response and some of the other, huge opportunities, huge benefits there are for getting people, using newer appliances, and, not only the energy shifting, energy reduction, et cetera. So I guess I sort of expected that more as a standalone because of the opportunity that is there. And there was a reference made earlier, I'm sorry, I can't remember who said it, to past programs. And so doing things like, using potential EECBG dollars that might be flowing from the feds or other types of funding sources that might be out there around rebates. I would be, and I know some of that has flowed in the past through the energy waste reduction programs, but anyway, that's something that's sort of come to mind for me that seems like it's an example of a tactic that would move the large sort of big strategy forward. So I'm sort of thinking of it as, what are the big strategies and then what are the tactics to get there? Or another way I like to think about it is what are the main dishes and then, what are the side dishes to support it? So I probably have made things messier, but just wanted to share how what I'm hearing. And this is a fantastic document and I think really, really good conversation. So I'm very grateful to everybody for participating.
Thanks, Director. If your hand's up for a second time, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just trying to hear from everybody. So I'm taking the first timers first, and then I will come back around. So Tanya Pozlowski.
Howdy.
Hello.
So I want to just join in the kudos to Karen and Charlotte. I also was following those meetings, and there was just, as evidenced by the recommendations, a massive amount of viewpoints and, as mentioned, tension, and this is a complicated issue. So I just want to thank them for what I know was not an easy effort and the folks at GPI to get to this place. On the recommendations themselves, and this goes a little bit off of what Director Clark was just saying about education, but a piece that I want to raise is around, I think, the importance of community engagement when this work is done. And I know that's maybe in the process a little bit further down the line, but in efforts to do, especially in communities, BIPOC communities or low-income communities, where there may not be a lot of trust in the system overall, and rightfully so, that it's imperative that we're all thinking about how to overcome that barrier to bringing these, cleaner, more efficient technologies to places where folks, are not engaged in these discussions now. Some of that work is happening at the Public Service Commission on affordability issues, but I just wanted to raise it in this forum as well, because for it to be effective, particularly I think from a energy burden standpoint or a bill payment standpoint, are going to be key to reach and to make sure that it's being done well, so that part of this is also reducing people's bills, understanding the conundrum between the increase in usage versus the energy efficiency. So I just want to make sure we bring that piece to the forefront of how important that is going to be in the success of this work. And the other one I wanted to raise on the health benefits, and I've read through the recommendations at a pretty high level, but on the health benefits, it seems that there is a lot of opportunity there to align health benefits with the cost benefit evaluation that will be done for these programs. And I have a friend who's done some work on the health impacts of energy efficiency, because you do have both community benefits and reduction in pollution, but also home benefits and reduction in pollution. And that does affect people's day-to-day health. And so just wanted to lend some more support for, I think, the importance of recognizing that aspect of this work, and another reason why it is so important that we are moving to a place where we are reducing, carbon, and with that, we will be reducing a lot of other types of pollutants as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Ron Vogelwade.
Thanks. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, once again, I'll jump on the train of appreciate the hard work. I think what was stated before is, buildings are systems, and so they are intricately linked to some of these key pillars of the strategy. I think that's what, and I appreciate Liesel's comments around how do we get to what are those intersections between, because those are the critical enablers to where we want to get to, which is the CO2 reductions, right? And I think there was some, I would say, parts of it that specified, let's say, certain technologies or aspects of it. But if we go back to the overall CO2 reductions, I think this is where DR is the most effective use, right, in certain applications to underlying that, as well as increasing the grid electrification, if you will, as well, which is, as we know, one of the largest impacts and has an overall reaching. So if you look, and I think it's bled through, effectively actually in several of the different recommendations. When you look at, the building code section 7, where you have flexibility in there, when you have the DR section in and of itself, specifically around some of those topics, when we talk about how do we actually activate and do the retrofits in the right way, where we get that ability to do the flexibility, because that's the only way you're going to really effectively manage the decarbonization and the push for electrification. So I think this is where you have the ability to leverage and finance, and I think that's the funding and financing when you look at 4 and 5, that those deep energy retrofits, if you look at the data around the age of the infrastructure, we're going to have to, in order to not to, create even more inequality in the space, be able to drive that down into those appropriate places, especially on the multifamily and others that quite frankly have been under invested in this space of retrofits that obviously provide all the different benefits that were already discussed with Tanya and others. And so I think that's one that we need to keep into the forefront as those enablers to those large reductions across, flexibility across the, grid and home, just like Ford, announced between grid and home on electric mobility. When you see, the application to renewables across the aspects of doing that in a retrofit environment. So I think that's the key for me, is how do you unlock those larger potential items? And so I'll leave it at that, but I think that's where you do see that main focus, and then how do you accelerate the capability of others to do that?
Very good. Yeah, and if there are ways that you can think of, or same with Tanya on the educational aspects, feel free to include comments that way too. That would be helpful, I think, to Eagle and to the other council members too. So thank you. Phyllis, coming back to you. Phyllis?
No, I'm sorry. Was my hand still up?
It's still up. Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
No, I'm still taking in.
Very good. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No worries. That's fine. Thanks. Sam Stoper.
Thanks, Doug. And thanks so much, Charlotte and Karen, for everything you've done here. And thanks for engaging with me in the chat as well. I can think of 2 things that I want to prioritize saying right now. One of them is that I think my overarching instinct in reading this set of recommendations is that, for me, electrification and incentivizing and creating programs that in particular try to push down the cost curve of installing, deploying electric appliances, electrifying buildings, is like my top priority, or I think a huge bang for our buck, because I think for the longest time in economics, in like environmental, energy, climate economics, the problem to address was always the negative externality of emissions. But I think recently there's been a switch or an addition to the top tier of what matters in terms of market failures, and that is learning, knowledge spillovers, the public good of that. And so when all these things that have been done all over the world to push down the cost curve of solar and electric vehicles, those have had just huge gains because they spill over across geography. And so I think that, if CO2 is what matters, then at some point you run up against a barrier with energy efficiency. And what seems more fundamentally important is switching to electric so that we can use the decarbonized grid. So like everything workforce, that's why I submitted one of my top recommendations to Alyssa was just the whole workforce development section. Because I think that labor and installation and training to do that at lower cost is part of learning, is part of that innovation and bringing down the cost curve. And then any money we can throw at research, development, and deployment also qualifies for the same thing. The other thing I wanted to say is it's increasingly seemed over time in our meetings, but especially today with some of the conversations we're having about the utility like resource UCT score and about energy efficiency goals and electrification goals that add load being butting heads. It just seems like there's a lot of opportunities to kind of reduce red tape and rules that we've had in place that emphasize one thing at the expense of CO2 or just otherwise don't incentivize the thing that reduces emissions. Or caring about it too. These tests, they should count health. They should count all things that emissions affect, as well-being. So that doesn't feel like it has immediate emission. Like it's not like you do that and then the emissions reductions are mechanically happen. But I think in the longer run, reducing those institutional barriers, those legal barriers, seems important. Thanks.
Did we lose Doug?
I'm wondering if we lost Doug.
I think I can pick up the participants list here. Ron, you had your hand up. Did you want to go next?
Sorry, I'm in that same vein. I'm not turning it down.
No problem. Other comments or questions from folks? And I'll say, I'm realizing taking notes in this document is maybe not the best format. Next time we might just take notes on screen because there's been some really good high-level comments. I want you to know we're capturing those, even if you didn't see me take them down. Darrell, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Sure, and I think you're doing a great job, Trevor. I put a comment in the chat, putting my NRDC hat, my local elected official hat, is that we do have a ton of dollars, from the American Rescue Plan that went to the state of Michigan and to local governments, and I think a lot of what we've been hearing is about, it sounds like there's some agreement that we need to move in the direction of electrification, and part of that process is moving away. We'll start to look at more electric appliances, and those dollars that have been granted to the state and local governments, that could potentially be a pot of money that we could really leverage to help drive down the cost of transitioning to those appliances. But I think what is missing is just like a particular plan and at least some direction in terms of how to go about doing that and providing guidance there. So just wanted to add that there.
Yeah, Darrell, I'm going to make a comment on that. And I'm reaching out to Brad because Brad has, the dollars and figures and information on this comment I'm about to make. But the comment you just made about the American Rescue Plan dollars really brought to light the importance of our workforce development recommendation, because we were told that DHHS had received a certain amount of money, and I'll have Brad put it in the chat. But of that, only a very small amount of it was going to be going towards weatherization that the bulk of it was going to have to go towards bill payment due to the fact that DHHS just did not think that they could spend the money in the time they were allotted due to a shortage of workforce in this area. So yeah, I appreciate you adding that comment. And so I know that if there's additional funding coming, towards Michigan for things that we could and should be utilizing more for weatherization and electrification, we definitely need to be building up that workforce and educating and driving training in that area.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, I appreciate it, Trevor. Thank you. My luck was running so good for so long. Phil has a question in the chat about the plan for modeling the GHG reductions and cost benefit economic health impacts for this work group and other work groups' recommendations. I don't know if Director Clark, if you wanted to take that one, if there's any kind of modeling work that's underway.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that at a high level. So one of the things that we did in parallel to this effort was employ a group, I think their name is GreenLink, to be doing some of the kind of high level understanding of the greenhouse gas reductions in particular. I know that we're going to quickly get out of my depth because I'm not up to date with all that they're doing, but my understanding is that they were looking at quantifying greenhouse gases and then also costs. So that there was a layer that is important to all of this, which is making sure that we're thinking about the public health component, the jobs component, the economic development component, as it all fits together. So again, this goes to the question that I think's come up both from sort of the bottom up in the work groups as well as from the top down from the council, as we're talking about, what are the nexus of these work group issues? What are the nexus of the recommendations? And then, we need to have some data to help us kind of understand if you push over here, you're going to end up pulling over here. So that just as a heads up, that's work that has been ongoing, and we'll share more about that in upcoming council meetings.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the question. Then also, you're part of a group of Midwestern states that's actually gotten some modeling on greenhouse gas reductions from the power sector, and there will be more that's available that way too. So it'll be a different set and different data points too. So that's good to have, I think.
Yeah, definitely good addition. Thanks, Doug. I forgot about that one too.
Okay. Let's see. Any other participants who would like to ask a question or make a comment? If you've been looking at the document on screen, you've also seen that Trevor has incorporated the comments that Brandon and James made before the meeting, and I don't know, they're both on. Would either of you like to speak to any of the comments that you made as well? We appreciate you adding really thorough comments into the document.
Yeah, thanks, Doug.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw, the team probably has seen a number of the comments I have. Certainly, I totally agree with many of the recommendations about leaning into energy efficiency as something that we've done, I think, as a state, a decent job of to date, but there's always more to do. And I think particularly some of the recommendations about maybe using stimulus funds or others to help customers that don't qualify for some of the low-income assistance programs might be really meaningful. I think the problem of decarbonizing buildings is primarily existing building stock, given what we heard from the demographer in the last session, that we're not exactly building a lot of new houses. It's really about how do we decarbonize our existing building stock? And so I think energy efficiency is sort of a no regrets thing that we should totally max out. I do have, as you probably have seen in the comments, some concerns about the electrification push, and I'll I realize that I'm speaking on behalf of a gas company, but we're also an electric company as well. And so I think to some degree, I understand my comments might be viewed with some degree of skepticism, but I think there is as much upside in electric sales as potential downside in gas loss. And where I try to position it is, what's the best solution for Michigan that balances affordability, reliability, and resilience, and fairness, and the move to clean. And some of the work that we've been doing, and we're trying to understand and have been looking at what other states have doing, suggests that that electrification might not be the easy button that it sort of logically may appear, where decarbonize electricity, electrify everything, done, And as we look at the complexities of just how dense natural gas is as a fuel carrier, and the amount of both electric distribution infrastructure and electric generation infrastructure that would be needed to fully electrify Michigan's heating loads, it starts to raise for me some really substantial affordability concerns in that the sort of full electrification scenario. I definitely think there's a role for electrification, but I do think there's also a continued role for a system of pipes as a low carbon fuel carrier to help balance, and make more resilient Michigan's energy needs. So I appreciate the recommendation of doing a low cost analysis and really understanding the different pathways and how they intersect. And I think that is something I definitely could rally around, but I am concerned about jumping to the conclusion that electrification is sort of the primary solution for Michigan's heating needs. I guess I'm not personally sold on that at this point, based on the research I've been doing.
Appreciate you sharing your comments. James, did you want to make any?
Just briefly, first of all, I'd like to as well say I really appreciate the co-chairs and the work that the work group did. I mean, this is an incredibly complex topic to address, and so I think there's a lot of really good recommendations that are associated with this. I sent my, ahead of time, I sent my comments in. I'm happy to talk about those. I don't want to go through all that stuff. I do think particularly there is an opportunity for workforce development. I listed those in the comments. I think there's a place in which organized labor currently can play a significant stakeholder role, both in outreach, recruitment, skill development, and leading technologies as well in energy efficiency and energy waste reduction technologies. I do know that several states, and this is kind of a question, I guess, to see where Michigan is on this, because I don't know the answer to this. Particularly, the state of Minnesota is referenced in the chat, and Minnesota did a decarbonization study on the natural gas side to understand what that looks like. I think that would be very beneficial if Michigan were to do something like that. That would really help inform much better some of the benefits of electrification and drawbacks of that, what that means in relation to infrastructure, facility, what that means for affordability, what that means for low carbon usage as well. I will as well put a note in here that folks may view my comments with skepticism, just in clear. I also worked and represented thousands and thousands of utility workers on both the gas side and the electric side. So I want to make that very clear. But I do think that there are some real learnings that could happen there. And I did put a comment in relation to where the state might be able to lead, both in state government buildings and also in the MUSH sector. For folks who don't know the MUSH, that's municipal, university, state, hospitals, on building shell energy efficiency technologies, be able to pilot some ways in which can really do some cutting edge things that might be able to really provide an informative way of looking at how communities might be able to approach this as well and understand what funding opportunities there might be. I understand there are, potentially rate-making issues associated with that, but I just wanted to add, particularly on understanding with decarbonization, what the thoughts are on doing some studying on what decarbonization of the natural gas sector looks like.
Thanks, James. And we were, GPI, principally Trevor was very involved in that on the Minnesota side. So we'd be happy to share any results of that or any thoughts. So let us know, and we'd be happy to do that. Thanks. Darrell?
No, just briefly, I just wanted to, Brandon made some comments, and appreciate his comments and concern about reliability, affordability. Those are some of the, for a very long time, some of the very basic things that you want to be concerned about as a utility providing service for folks. But, I guess just from my perspective, and as somebody, even when I was a staffer at the Public Service Commission, electrification was something that have been talked about, but not really tried and really tested. And I know we have, even within Consumers Energy and DTE and some of these other utilities being piloted out, some of these electrification or all electric pilots. And so, I know folks, there's some concerns that have been brought up. I feel like we haven't even gotten to fully even got to some of the areas where there would be a real concern. And so some of the recommendations in here that Karen and Charlotte have provided, and some of the other ones I've seen in other groups, I think are worthwhile and absolutely worth putting some time and energy and exploring. So, but I hear the concern there, but I think we could do both, providing reliable, affordable, safe service for folks while also exploring and doing more in electrification. So just wanted to add that comment. So
thanks, Darrell. There was a lot in the chat about, I want to do a couple things left, but obviously we'll get in other people's comments as well. But there was a lot in the chat about potential for federal money. And again, nobody knows exactly what that's going to look like. That's part of what's going on in DC this week. So, but I'm assuming Director and all the co-chairs are actively monitoring that and seeing what impact that's going to have on recommendations and where you could plug that money in to further some of the recommendations that come from this. I'm assuming that, Director. So
yes, that's a very good assumption. And the only thing I noticed in the chat that I would just give a little bit more illumination to is while we'll understand better once, votes are taken, the parameters around use of dollars. In Michigan, there is often what we call work project money. So we're able to have the money appropriated, obviously working with the legislature in terms of what sort of programs they want to see it in. But then we can work project money for about 4 years. So there might be ways to use those dollars that extend the longevity a little bit. I do think we need to think about, what sort of dollars might be flowing to other areas of government. So of course that conversation about cities, villages, counties, et cetera, we want to make sure that we have cohesiveness across all branches of government so that we're really creating momentum with these dollars. And, when I think about the potential to use some future ARP dollars, what I'm really focused on is making sure that we're doing it effectively and efficiently. There were some challenges with implementing the ARA dollars way back in the day. And I think that, we're certainly more sophisticated. However, I also think that we got to up our game in terms of what we're doing to make sure there's appropriate oversight, appropriate transparency, et cetera, with getting those dollars out the door. So to Doug's point, we'll know more when we see further progress from DC, but there's absolutely a lot of attention being paid from a state government perspective to try to do as much pre-planning as possible.
Great, thanks. Phyllis, see you have your hand up. You're on mute, Phyllis.
I was just saying, yeah, my hand is raised this time.
Okay, I thought you were just messing with me again.
I'm messing with you. So I had a question. Well, I wanted to piggyback on something that Director Clark said, because I wasn't clear, how specific we will get because as I've been reviewing the document, as we're going multitasking a little bit, you know, I would hate this to end up being sort of a thing that we read and we don't have any idea who's going to do this work. And so I'm hoping that in some ways, if we can get to a little bit more without being prescriptive, when I know that's what our co-chairs are trying to avoid, at least some ideas about who should do what, because this is an all-in thing in my mind. At the Kresge Foundation, we just took this stance of all of our program areas are going to be in this space. We think it's important enough for us all, regardless of whether in education or health, we're all in. That's how I feel about what has to happen in this state. So making sure that we've got that the recommendations, because sometimes they don't come up because the partners aren't there, but I want to make sure that we get on the table the philanthropic community, especially now. We might not be building the buildings and stuff, but especially around things like workforce, foundations are taking a bigger stance and partnering with government to achieve the objectives of the municipalities, the states, and et cetera. So I hope that that doesn't get missed. We can talk about what's happening federally and maybe opportunities to leverage, but foundations are, I mean, we have a whole network of folks who are in this space, who work locally as well as nationally. And I just think to get where we need to go, it has to be all in. And so I just wanted to put that on the table.
May I, Doug?
Please.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that, you know, you can see this in the recommendations is in front of us that the co-chairs and the work group have worked to identify who would be the actor. But, you know, I totally agree with how you're thinking. And in fact, so much work has already happened, not only from federal government, state government, but also, frankly, from the private sector. Like there's been just a ton of action already. We all know that we need more and we need to do it, you know, more aggressively and more organized and more cohesively. But yeah, I hear what you're saying for sure. And I think that, you know, that's something that we need to make sure gets reflected here, Phyllis.
Thank you. Any last comments? Drell, is your hand still up, or are you up again?
I'm so sorry. I got a really sensitive mouse pad here.
No, you're.
Yeah. Is it down? I'm down.
You just came back up, so.
No way. Okay. Now I'm down. Right.
Okay.
And mine was from before, so I just lowered.
Okay. Great. Just wanted to make sure. We've got just a couple minutes left in this section before we talk about some next steps for next meeting. Trevor had some themes he tried to capture from the discussion so far. Trevor, do you want to go through those really quickly, and then we'll get to I think Sam Stolper's got his hand up, and then we'll turn it back to Director Clark.
Yeah, let me take a crack here. So obviously I was taking notes throughout, and then I stopped just at the end here to see if I could just write down what seems like some high level themes coming out of this, and you can all say if we got these right or not. But so we talked about this question about the overlap across the work groups and making sense of that. I think that's probably maybe a placeholder for a future conversation. We're thinking that will become more clear as you hear from more of the work groups, and there really are some clear overlap. The co-chairs have been thinking that that's a good thing. Like, to the extent there are overlaps, that emphasizes to you all some of the key levers that should be paid attention to. But we can come back to that, and it sounds like the green links analysis might help. I think we heard a lot about lifting up the public health benefits of electrification and decarbonization measures. Quite a bit on workforce opportunities, including diversifying the energy workforce. I think there were several comments on the federal stimulus funds to support decarbonization and how can those help to do all of these things. There were a few different comments that I think are of the theme of just targeting the right goals with programs and policies. So we talked a bit about that with the energy waste reduction program, but there were some other comments to that as well. Some good emphasis on education and outreach, including focus on BIPOC and low-income communities. And then I was hearing sort of broad support for electrification, but there was also this concern raised about deciding on electrification as the only pathway before conducting that analysis that's stated in the overarching recommendation. I don't know if we have time to see if we got this right or if there are gaps there. But.
Well, let me go to Sam first, and then if anybody else has a last comment on this, or they can comment on it offline too as well. So Sam.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Trevor. Yeah, apropos of this list, the thing that I was going to say was just in response to what Brandon said, and then Darrell. I appreciate, Brandon, what you shared, and I think we may have talked about this before, you and I, but I am also currently under the impression that building electrification is not the most competitive on cost effectiveness grounds in the here and now, and to the extent that has consequences for affordability, that's concerning. I guess when I issued my broad support for electrification, I was, what was front of mind for me was, one, the fact that I think costs are high now, and I think pushing us down that cost curve is really compelling. And two, along the lines of what Darrell said, I think that affordability is in some ways divorceable from efficiency, from cost effectiveness, that we can do relatively more costly things if, in the here and now if we think that's important, and still rearrange dollars and programs in society to make those who might otherwise experience regressive impacts or unaffordability better off. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. All right. Thank you, everybody, for a really, really great discussion today. A lot of good feedback. Thanks again to the co-chairs for not only leading that process, but also for all the work to put the recommendations out in the form so that folks could react to it. So with that, let me turn it back to Director Clark.
Great. Thank you, Doug. This was a really good conversation. Please, as Doug has said a couple of times, know that this is not the end by any means. This was just sort of the starting point. So grateful to the co-chairs, grateful to the GPI team, grateful to the Eagle team for all the pieces that are coming together here. So, but most importantly, thank you to the council members for your time, for your attention, and I know for the thought process you put into it before we get even to this council meeting today and to the next one. So our next meeting then is October 19th from 1 to 3. So as usual, materials will be posted as quickly as possible at michigan.gov/climate. And for those who might be following along who are not council members, just know that we really do appreciate a regular public input as we're going through this process. And you can use the email box eagle-climatesolutions@michigan.gov. So we monitor that regularly and then compile that information and get it out to the council members. The work group recommendations will also be posted on the website as soon as they become available. I know we've gotten some requests for that. And then comments on building and housing that we just spoke about on these recommendations can be submitted through the building and housing email box, which is eagle-buildings-housing-climate@michigan.gov. So I think folks are familiar with that already through the course of the work group process, but just wanted to articulate that again. So with that, we're really very much looking forward to seeing everybody on October 19th, and maybe soon, one of these days, we'll get to do this in person. So thanks for your time. And again, thanks to the GPI team, to Doug and Trevor for facilitating. So
thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks all.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.